Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Change Doesn't Have to Suck podcast. I'm Jasmine.
And I'm Alistair.
And we're here at the Organisational Development Australia Conference here in Melbourne, which is a little chilly. We're outside. We've got our jackets on. But we are very honoured to be joined by today's keynote, Dr. Brendel, who has a really interesting topic for us, one we have never had on the podcast before, but I'm really, really keen to dive deep into this. So today's topic, listeners and viewers, if you're here on YouTube, is why openness is a KPI organizations should start measuring immediately. Bill, you're going to tell us all about it, but first let's hear a little bit about you and what brings you to Australia.
Well, I've been in contact with folks in Australia for a long time, for at least the last 5 years. And the OD Australia group is amazing. I just had nothing but amazing experiences with them. And they were gracious and invited me over here to do a keynote on this topic that I've been interested in for a very long time, this idea of openness. And here I am.
Yeah, I love that. And we got, the people behind the scenes wanted to get to see that. We got to see you this morning in the keynote, and the way you bring warmth into the room and create that openness yourself. One, kudos. But two, in terms of the topic, there's so much going on, and we've been measuring performance and productivity. We're recently measuring engagement and sentiment of employees and customers, etc. Why is openness such a critical thing to be measuring right now?
Oh, there's so many places I can go with this, but for the viewer, I would say, or the listener, I should say that we are living in a time of rapid, accelerated change. So when we say AI has changed everything, it's, well, have you looked at the news today?
Yes.
Right? So even in 3 weeks' time, we're going to be dealing in a whole new world of AI. And because of that, people are beginning to question their own value at work. And change is beginning to really become part of work. And so there's a great deal of change fatigue. And you know what happens when people are faced with something that feels like a threat is they kind of close, the opposite of opening, they close. And when they do that, all of their creative faculties go out the window. All of their ability to communicate cohesively with people go out the window. So the question is, instead of closing, how do we get people to open back up again and honestly embrace the change? That's really what we're going for here.
Alistair knows what I'm going to say next because it's something I've borrowed from Gary Hamel many years ago, but I would love your opinion on this, Bill, because I think humans are built for change. So why are we closing?
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, I use the image of a flower, right? And when the flower is tight as a bud, it's not an inherently bad thing because it's growing something inside and the bud is protecting that growth. But the time comes when the flower needs to blossom, right? And that's the question. What is it that makes a flower or ourselves willing and able to blossom and embrace things that are new? So it's just a little bit of a metaphor to think about with your own life. So let's come back to that question again. Ask that question again.
Well, my question is, so I guess biologically, humans can change. Saber-toothed tiger is coming to the cave, we run. We can adapt quickly. But in recent times, despite so much change happening around us, we're choosing not to. And is that a, protection that we're doing to ourselves, or are we, there's too much around us, so what we can control is our willingness to change?
Right.
What's happening?
Well, there's the basic fear response is fight, flight, or freeze, right? So some of us, you might say, are fleeing from change, and that's happening. You're seeing that happening in countries like China, where people don't want to be running around and doing all this stuff, so they pack up, they make things simple, and they move out to the country and live a very simple life. It's a phenomenon that's happening right now, all over Asia, as a matter of fact. But then there's the freeze. The freeze is not that we don't want to change, it's just we're stuck. We are arrested in place because what is happening around us is happening so quickly and ferociously that we can't even process the change that is happening. And then, of course, there are those who fight the change, the ones who resist the change. The nature of change is important, too, because you've got planned change, right? So then there's unplanned change that change that happens to you. And so depending on the nature of change, those types of dynamics change.
And to take it a step further, you're looking at planned and unplanned change for individuals, and then the three responses. If we're looking at it from an organizational perspective, there's very little change from an employee's perspective that was entirely planned. Career steps, they're seeking, actually, I want to move to that department. But outside that, most of it is unplanned to them. It might be planned to their leaders or planned to their leadership chain, but there's not a lot of inherent change planned by that employee. So I think naturally the environment where organizations work within, people are one step behind because it's unplanned change being applied to them. So we need to be applying comforts to support the unplanned change and understand each of those individuals and how they might respond. I know I loved the metaphors you threw into your presentation. From a trying to diagnose and support those individuals through change in an organization, how do you start working with them to go, okay, you're very likely to react and be resistant. You're very likely to freeze and to be stagnant. How do you help your clients work through that challenge?
I love that question. So first, know yourself, right? And everybody's different and every culture is different. So we have an assessment called the Open Assessment, and it measures two things. And they're two really important, well-regarded psychological constructs. One is psychological safety. Okay. Is that, are you able to change, right? Does the environment support your change? And then you have growth mindset. Okay. Are you willing to change? And if you look at those simultaneously, right? If you have high psychological safety, right? You feel very, very safe, but you have low growth mindset. You might be in a settled organization where you feel comfortable. Why change, right? And we know organizations like this, danger in that. And then if you're in an organization that has low psychological safety and low growth mindset, now you're in emergency land. This is crisis land, okay? And that means you're not willing or able to change. And you may have worked in an organization like that before. And then you have another interesting type where you've got a high growth mindset and low psychological safety. And these are my least favorite ones to work in. They're the anxious organizations. And then if you have high psychological safety and growth mindset, you're in an open organization. So the first thing is to assess what are the characteristics of an organization that support growth mindset and psychological safety. And then depending on what quadrant you find yourself in, there are different approaches that you take to build those supports. So to get to your question, how do you support it? First thing we need to do is identify what type of an organization are you in right now, right? Context is everything.
Absolutely.
And then which aspects of openness in your organization are most closely tied to performance, satisfaction, and retention. So that's like the first, setting the stage is holding a mirror up to the organization and saying, here's what's going on. Here's where your collective headspace is. And here are your greatest possible levers when it comes to performance, retention, and satisfaction.
I really love the way that you've, put that on an axis with psychological safety and the growth mindset, because I think there are some people, not everybody, I think we're coming around as a business cohort that might go, oh, they're fluffy things or nice to have. But then you just put actual key performance metrics against them. And, those of us who are in this industry, we know that if you get those two things right, you actually do get financial productivity, all those outcomes that we're chasing as leaders, and you're looking after people. It's a win-win. And, do you have anything you would say to people who are resistant to being open to looking at psychological safety or growth mindset or openness generally?
I mean, the research is here. I mean, and I can give you several client cases where there were improvements to specific levers of psychological safety and growth mindset that created statistically significant improvements in performance. I mean, that alone, and the assessment item there is, do you believe you're performing to the fullest of your ability in this job? Okay. So imagine getting everybody to move one tick up, right? And to do that, the group itself can actually take control of its own destiny. And that's why we use action learning to propel that forward. So the levers that we identify aren't things that the organization does to its people. These are starting points for change. And then we bring people into action learning groups that actually drive that change. They prototype it, they test it, and then they bring it about. And lots of really cool examples of how people are doing that now.
And using like the human action group to understand you're a cohort or a subset of the broader cohort.
Yes.
And we're going to test it, we're going to trial it. And if it's working here, based on the way we've pulled the right cohort in, okay, the broader group should respond in a similar way. And assuming you got the original cohort right.
That's right.
Makes so much sense. I have a question around, you're trying to understand how to design that cohort, right? And you're looking at, are those individuals appropriate or are they ready? We separately are looking at, what is their motivation and their motivators as an individual? And then are they supported by leadership? Because those two things, I love when you said there's a natural lever of you're going to have how well are you performing in your job? My brain went, I have two thoughts. One is, am I supported to perform well? And the other one is, am I motivated to perform well? And linking those two into what you're doing, which is something our brains have been pondering on, and we're working into what we do every day. Is that something that when you're taking and pulling these groups together, you're considering, hey, this finance team has got a struggling leadership cohort. We're going to bring some of them in. And this IT team is killing it over here. Their managers are great, but their workers are really struggling. Do you bring all of them into the room and then that's how you build?
That is a fantastic question. And so all I do is I kind of follow what the research says is good to do, but it's also kind of like intuitive, right? So if I were to pull people from different groups and put them on a specific team to address a specific topic, some of those people might not want to address that topic or might not be interesting, even if it's the thing that is affecting them. So what we do is we open up the space. I
love it.
And we create different pockets, different places that people can gravitate toward. We explain the correlation. We explain what we're trying to improve. And then we allow people to simply vote with their feet. So if you bring a lot of people in, you typically end up with a cross section of the organization moving to a space they really want to change. And they feel like, I have ideas. I wanted to address this before. Now you got energy in those spaces.
And using them, like making them move their feet is such a smart way for them to connect. Like they're not only projecting in their minds, where do I want this to be? So their mindset shift is physically moving because you're making them move their feet.
Right.
I absolutely
It's very symbolic.
Yeah, it is symbolic.
Especially when the room sees where everybody's standing. And there's this quiet moment where everyone looks at each other. Okay.
But how rarely does that engagement survey pick up on actually the organization is pretty divided on where we want to go?
Yeah.
That everybody's in the room and can see the cohort that isn't standing in the box with them, they're over there. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it's a signal that we're not aligned and we should go and address that.
That's interesting because there's another form of misalignment, which is where I thought you were going. It's where you ask somebody about some feature of openness. Like, for instance, I feel safe to go and talk to my supervisor when I have an idea that maybe challenges their idea a bit. You might find what they call a bimodal distribution where half of the organization feels it is safe. Half the organization feels it isn't safe. What does that mean about all of your supervisors? Are they operating with the same degree of psychological safety as each other? No, they're not.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Okay, now we have more evidence of what we need to work on. So that might be a group that works on standardizing process and expectations. And
learning from each other, learning from who's doing well, right? Like
it's internal best practice sharing, right? Looking at the exemplars in the organization. Because frankly, it's not because sometimes people are mean at
Yeah.
work, but they're all good people. And sometimes they just don't have the tools or the skills to lead psychologically. Just a perfect example is, and you've heard this before, a boss might say, my door is always open, and they leave the door open. That's not psychological safety. It might feel like it is, but are you accessible, mentally accessible when the employee walks in through the door? So it's really interesting because part of what I love about this whole process is you hold up a mirror to the organization, and then people get a good look at themselves. And you're not the one that's suggesting any particular type of change. But if somebody sees little hairs down here, they're likely to do it themselves. And so we as consultants are really just keepers of a process.
And it's something that I love the analogy of holding a mirror up to the organization, and then they get to see likely the small adjustments they can make themselves. How have you battled through, for any of the practitioners listening who also are trying to hold a mirror up? How have you battled through and successfully said, hey, here's the mirror, but it's pointing right at you leaders that asked me to come in. And so you've literally said, hey, actually, you're the problem in whatever facet it may be. Because I know it's a challenge where we'll get hired to come in and there's big change coming. And we basically say, actually, guys, you're not ready. But it's not because your people aren't ready. It's actually because you're not aligned at a leadership level or an executive level to enable that change.
Right.
And it's really difficult to say if they've hired you to come in and help them enable the change.
Yes.
How can you help anyone listening on how they would battle that challenge?
There are two things in this process that you absolutely have to do. Number one is measure more than just leaders being part of the problem. But there's a big piece for leaders, but you're also looking at organization design and learning systems and how teams operate together, right? So when you look at all of those, leaders might have a little stake in the game, but it's not just leaders. There's all these other parts of the system. So this way, leaders don't feel like all the fingers are pointing to them. But the second thing is, in couples therapy, sometimes they might remove the people who are together and talk to them separately, right? And that's something that we do, because the first thing we need to do is when we get those leaders into a room by themselves, they could be supervisors, managers, and we say, here's what the data says. This is data, right? Your employees believe that you are not being transparent. And that has a statistically significant correlation with their performance. All right. Good starting point, right? First thing we do is we ask leaders to write a statement of commitment that we are going to support the ideas you have for turning this around. And that's hard. It's really, really hard. But you get people crafting a letter of commitment. We are committed to helping this happen. When you bring the people back together into the same room, they share that commitment, but they also share what they need help with. And this is the hardest part. So leaders say, I'm going to ask my employees for help with something. Yes, you are, because you do need their help. It could be anything. It could be grace. It could be patience. It could be, I need to know more about this piece, right? And boy, you want to see shock on employees' faces. It's when leaders are asking for help. It's really hard to do that, right?
And it's revolutionary when it happens. It's this human connection of what happens next. I love it. I wanted to ask you something I saw earlier from your keynote, and it's stuck in my brain as an image, and it was an elephant.
Yep.
And we are at ODA at the conference today, Alistair, and I think I would love to hear your opinion on what exactly is organizational development and design, because when I saw that image, and maybe we'll flash it up, or maybe you can describe it for us, Bill, of all the facets that OD is, I think there's a lot of people who actually don't really know what OD is and the value of it. And the more I'm learning about it, I'm thinking, this is the coolest department in any organization and any consulting that you can do. So yeah, if you could just run through what are all the parts. And I also loved what you said of, you can do a little bit of, a little bit of the different colors.
Yes. Okay. So let's ground our conversation about what OD is. Okay. There are characteristics of OD that you will find anywhere somebody says and is actually doing bona fide OD work. The first thing is that if you want to change behavior, Kurt Lewin said, behavior is a function of the person and the environment. So let's say I'm doing executive coaching for a person. Is executive coaching OD? No, because you're not addressing the environment. Okay. Now, what is in the environment? You've got systems and structures and design and leadership and learning. And there's so many things that you can address that are part of that environment, right? So you know you're doing OD if you're influencing an organization at the intersection of the person and the environment. The broader way of thinking of this is that human systems, all human systems, are social technical systems. There's a social aspect, and then there's, hey, we're sitting in these chairs, we have a roof over us, we're being recorded. There is a technical system going on, right? The technical system influences the human system, and the human system impacts the efficacy and the performance of the technical system. So what OD aims for is something called joint optimization, which means both the social aspect improves and the technical aspect. Technical aspect could be something that has to do with design, performance, right? Those sorts of things. But that challenges the idea that, well, if we're only working with the soft stuff, we're not addressing the hard stuff, right? Or if we're only addressing the hard stuff, we're not addressing the social, technical system. All right. So this is a very simple rule, right? If our job is to influence for human systems at both the social and the technical space, that means there are three things we need to know about. We need to know about how to influence, and there are a few different ways to do that. I use the color yellow for influence.
Which is where change management was sitting, I did notice.
That's right. Yes. And there's a whole bunch of categories around that, but you've got all this influence, right? And then you've got the blue color of the elephant is the social aspect of the elephant, right? And so let's name them, right? So for the social aspect of the elephant, you have teams, you have the psychology, which is really important, and then you have humanity. And humanity deals with things like spirituality, citizenship, meaningful work, right? Equity and inclusion, those types of things. So that's the blue. That's the social part of a system that OD can touch. Doesn't have to touch all of them. That's the cool part. The technical part is strategy, performance, and design. Okay, that's the red. And then the yellow part, you've got change, consulting, and learning. All right, those are your levers. So that means that if you're doing an OD engagement, right, you can tune the competencies you use based on the presenting challenge that the organization has, right? And so you can, as long as you're doing something from each of those three things, you're following what the originators of this practice said, which is you're influencing the socio-technical system. And then you can stand on any table and tell people, I'm doing OD and here's why. Does that make sense?
It really does.
A little verbose, but
No, but you know what it's made me realize, Jazz, is the way in which we're approaching change is actually at an OD level. We're not applying change in the only the influence sense. We're applying it in, we're looking at technical systems all the time, the strategy, the actual technical systems as well. And then we're going and say, how is it impacting the social? Oh, well, what is the impact of that to the individual? What is the intent of that organization going to impact the actual teams and how they are working together? So it's made me realize what our change management that we're doing is misrepresented potentially.
We're in OD now.
Oh my gosh. Which is, I think, maybe why we naturally have moved. We see so much change management get bolted on to a project. Hey, a project's kicking off and here's your change management. And we never fit that box. And we were like, this isn't working for us because from our perspective, there's so much more to consider than just,
Absolutely.
hey, is this system going to land, or is this restructure going to work the way we
Yeah.
thought it was? Well, did you consider all of the technical components, how it's going to hit the social components?
So equity here, how does this impact performance, right? So it's interesting because that's one of my little, I don't know, one of the things that bothers me a little bit about change management is it's a beautiful thing, but it's only a third of the story, right? There's much more to it.
Much more to it.
So there's a little bit of a, what's the right way to put it? A little bit of discomfort between OD people and change management people. Because, but change management has changed and it's now adopting more OD characteristics. Same with IT. IT is now borrowing ideas from OD. Human-centered design or design thinking is borrowing, and vice versa. OD is now using design thinking, but it's the same thing. It's really the same thing.
At the end of the day, we're designing with the human in mind. And
That's
connecting everything around them back to that individual.
Yep.
There was one I had, in terms of you have this change management, and I was having a discussion earlier in the building with one of the attendees of ODA. And I think I've now confused poor Michelle, because I think I said the way I see change is actually what you've qualified to be OD. And she was like, that's weird. That sounds like OD to me. And I was like, that's how I do change. So she's like, well, that must be change in Australia then.
Oh,
Now I've confused poor Michelle because I think I have misrepresented what we do.
But to Bill's point, if we're all aligning and converging and
We are.
integrating
I
our
agree.
thinking, then
that's great.
everybody's benefiting. Win, win, win. I want to ask you back to openness. So looking at, the technical, the social, the influential parts of organizational development, I'm assuming, but I don't want to lead the witness, that as practitioners, we need to be open to, have a new idea, to hear a different perspective.
Yes.
And then that also, back to the point about leaders, if we're all coming from a place of openness, it encourages everyone to come to the table with the right thing at the right time.
Absolutely.
Is that a fair assumption?
It is fair, and it's actually one of the traps for new OD consultants, also veteran OD consultants. Imagine that you're hungry for work, and let's say you're an external consultant and you get a gig. Well, all of us are well-meaning people. We want to show our worth right away. We want to walk in and say something clever and amazing and ask all the right questions right away. But that's not very open. That's actually very pointed and predetermined and planned, right? Openness means taking your biases and your tools and everything you learn and just putting them over here, even if just temporarily, getting out of your own way and walking in and doing what Ed Schein calls asking stupid questions, right? Like asking really fundamental, obvious questions that are so obvious that the people who work there wouldn't even think to ask themselves, right? Why do we meet in this space? We take that for granted. Why do we meet in this space? Maybe we should have walking meetings. Now the idea begins to grow, right? And the OD practitioner is doing something called use of self. I don't know are you familiar with that concept?
No.
Use of self. It's a fundamental concept, and it's in that yellow piece of influence. The practitioner themselves, right? So if you come into a system, you've already impacted the system.
Yes.
You're influencing it.
Yeah.
So if you're in the system now and you sit down and you don't jump to give a great, clever answer or do anything clever or run a tool, people see that. They see that, and they can see that you're more effective by listening and opening that space than by rushing in and trying to save the day with some ad car or some other expert model to drive change. A lot of times people aren't open to listening. They just close. Let's get that work done. But yeah, so the practitioner plays a really big role in that.
Is that also a product of us as a society? And this came up in another episode of we value outputs. We value productivity, particularly if you're a consultant, am I getting my money's worth? But really the value, we should flip that conversation to be, your value is your fresh perspective. It's your fresh eyes. And to do that, you have to ask questions. You have to be curious. You have to sit in the room and observe. How do we, educate everyone that that's valuable?
Oh, it's invaluable, because right now AI can answer almost any question, but insight is at a premium. So if everybody's using, AI and AI is brilliant. I use it all the time. It's fantastic. But does AI give us genuine insight? And what is genuine insight? So an organization might be stuck, right? Maybe they're not selling a product. Maybe they've pissed off a certain population of their external stakeholders. There's all kinds of, they get stuck. But how do you get unstuck? That's the question. Well, ChatGPT might give you some steps and some ideas. Well, maybe you've tried those already. But it's the clever ideas that you haven't thought of yet, right? That maybe come up in a dream. Here's an example. So with this one client I have, big problem they had was transparency with their, the people who run the place. And the supervisor said, okay, we hear you. We see the statistics. We see that it's important to your retention. So what should we do about it, right? Well, they didn't ask ChatGPT, but what they did was they said, you know what? They imagined if all the supervisors were on a plane and the plane went down and there were no more supervisors, could you give some type of an instruction guide to the janitor, and they could pick that guide up and make any decision they had to based on specific criteria, because they wanted to know, just like a kid wants to know with their parents. Why did you say no to that? Why did you say no and you didn't say no? So what they did was they created a decision-making playbook, right? That forced two things. One is transparency. Here's how we make decisions. But it also enforced standard decision-making criteria across supervisors, which means that nobody feels like, I'd rather work for you because she's the one who always does this and you're the one who always does that. There was another really great insight that came up. There were rumors being spread, and it was it was a sort of a rumor factory, and people would come in and nobody knew who was going to be bullied next. And so this one group said, well, what if we killed the rumor before it spread too far? And we learned from the rumor. So they came up with this idea of the rumor crusher. Now, I don't know if ChatGPT could do that, but they designed, they later called it the clarity portal, that if anybody heard a rumor, they could submit that rumor to an email. That email would be looked at and would be responded to, whether that rumor is correct, it's incorrect. But here's the coolest part. This team of employees said, and this is the really key insight, is there's actually value in rumors. There's something we can learn from those rumors. So let's embrace them. That rumor came up for a reason. What is that data indicating, right? And so this is why insight is the premium. This is like, these are, and the coolest part about doing this work is when employees come up with really fun, clever solutions that do the trick, right?
They have the best ideas every time.
They really do.
I love that, though, in those examples, which I could talk to you about that case study all day. But you have to have, to your point, in the environment of openness to not only that people can send that information in, but that it can be received and that it's psychologically safe.
Yes.
It doesn't become a witch hunt, right?
Yes.
And you said something earlier, which if you're listening, this might stick in your brain too. AI can't dream.
No, it can't.
Humans can together.
Yes. I mean, it all comes back to the psychologist like Carl Jung, who wrote a book, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. And there's something very special about being human and how we get our best ideas. So my kind of general hope is that we can all keep an open mind about what the future of work looks like, which isn't too far off in the distance, a time when meetings, decisions, and those sorts of things will be done by rational minds, right? AI, right? Which doesn't need sleep, work 24 hours a day, right? But human beings understand the ethics behind decision making, right? They have ethics has a feeling, it has a soul to it. but so does innovation, and so does inclusion. These are things that only we can really do. So we'll see where it goes.
And keeping the human in the loop of there's all these decisions being made. And to your point, in the future, rational decision making at speed, at scale, but having and enabling the human to sustain their connection to the loop so they can touch on, actually, ethically, that's probably not where we want that to be.
Right.
It's something that I don't think we're seeing enough of our clients or people we work with in Australia consider when they're rolling out AI and they're rolling out what is probably one of the biggest changes to workplaces that we've seen ever.
Yeah.
And so it's, again, the balance of sustaining the openness, ensuring that people are comfortable with such a large change coming, but organizations looking in the mirror, like you said earlier, of, well, where are we wanting to go and what are we wanting to look like and how do we want to enable and support our people through such a big change like AI. This has been such a fabulous chat with you. My goodness.
Thank you.
I have a quote that I'm now going to take with me and I'm going to paste it on certain executives' desk, which is, insight is at a premium. So let's try and find that. Like you said before, insight's at a premium. That is so topical for so many organizations right now where there is so much change happening. How do you know where to look? And we often hear, like, we lifted a rock up and, oh my God, we found it was worse. So if we stop lifting rocks, we left them all on the ground, right? Yeah. So, and again, but that leaves you back right in your, either in your settled quadrant or in your, what was the bottom left quadrant? Anxious quadrant.
Closed.
I mean, again, we could talk all day on this, but I want to, if anyone else is listening and they want to take something away about how they, as individuals, employees or leaders, could just start applying openness from tomorrow, maybe a bit better than they did yesterday or today, what would you recommend?
Oh my goodness. Well, we all have different learning styles, right?
Absolutely.
So some people like to read books, some people like to experiment with things. So let's see if we could go around the learning style loop here. There are a lot of great wisdom traditions out there that speak about letting go, right? Or getting out of your own way, or using beginner's mind, all right? Non-judgmental attitude, mindfulness attitudes. So there's an author who has influenced me greatly, Jon Kabat-Zinn, who writes about mindfulness meditation from the Zen meditation perspective. Otto Scharmer, took action learning and mindfulness and put them together. He's out of MIT. He's out of the sort of the Ed Schein lineage. He would be somebody that I think people would be interested in reading. If you go to presencing.org, you can learn. There's free tools. There's free all kind of exercises. But I really think if people learn from active experimentation, it might be the use of silence. Right? And here's a little trick. You can, if you go into a meeting, and you have like 15 things on your mind, ask yourself, what are the 3 things I want to make sure I leave behind in this meeting? You write them down, you go into the meeting, and you listen. And you listen, and you listen, and you listen. And then you find the right time, you find the right place. Maybe somebody already made the point you were going to make. Great. Check that off the list. Keep listening. Keep listening. Stay open. Maybe there's something that's not on your list that should be. The reason I give that little write it down trick is because we're bombarded with information and decisions and, and heat when you're in the heat of a discussion, right? It's easy to forget what you wanted to say. There's a little security blanket. That's something to maybe experiment with and being open. Yeah. And then, of course, take the assessment, right? And see where you're at. If you take this assessment, you'll see, right? Oh my gosh, maybe there is something I'm doing as a leader I can do better. But there's also this little design flaw we have over here. And we don't have a way of sharing knowledge like this over here, right? So, if you're more of an assessment person, you might find that helpful.
We love assessments and data because it informs like which rocks you should turn over and, where do you go with your qualitative and, your insights after that. This has been an incredible conversation, Bill. Thank you so much. We have learned so much, and I'm sure people watching or listening in would like to learn more as well. Where can they find out more about your open assessment or just the work that you're doing over in the States?
Oh, well, my passion project is democratizing organization development, which means getting it out from behind paywalls. There's a lot of different types of paywalls, right?
That's openness in a different way.
It's a whole different openness, right? And actually, that's something that's been preventing the proliferation of OD, which I think is one of the greatest gifts that we have on this planet. It impacts policy, the way organizations work together, who you work for. I mean, the whole thing. So I've just moved my old website, Open Source OD, to a new one, which is, I guess I'm announcing it here for the first time. It's called organizationdevelopment.io. If you're brand new to OD, you can take an assessment and learn how your interests and strengths match OD careers. You can take the open assessment, right? You can search for jobs there. There's a whole lot of things that we're opening. Explore tools and OD interventions. It's all there. So that should be releasing really soon.
Goodness.
Thank you for walking the talk with openness and sending us there and announcing it here first. What an honor for the podcast. This has been wonderful. We could talk to you all day. We say that with everybody, but we genuinely could. But we will let you go back to the conference now. Thank you for tuning in. And this has been the Change Doesn't Have to Suck podcast. And we will see you next episode.